The morning sun cascaded gently over the sleek glass facade of the Skyline private jet terminal, illuminating it with a glow that spoke quietly of privilege, prestige, and the promise of journeys yet to unfold. Limousines glistened patiently outside, their polished bodies reflecting the calm sky above. Inside, a world of elegance and comfort was encapsulated in polished marble floors, leather seating, and the soft aroma of freshly brewed coffee that mingled subtly with expensive perfumes. It was within this atmosphere of refined luxury that Ava Mitchell stepped gracefully out of her black sedan, her heels clicking rhythmically against the polished stone pavement. Ava's presence was quiet, yet undeniably magnetic. Her elegance radiated not merely from her designer blazer or the understated jewelry that adorned her, but rather from a quiet confidence in the way she carried herself. A self-assured poise that could only be earned through years of relentless effort and achievement. Yet as Ava moved toward the entrance, she couldn't shake off a vague uneasiness, the kind that comes from subtle glances, second guesses, and hushed whispers. She was no stranger to such feelings. After all, navigating spaces that rarely welcome people who looked like her had been an unfortunate constant throughout her ascent. Today, however, was different. Today was supposed to be hers, a flight arranged by her own company in a jet she had personally commissioned. Ava approached the check-in desk calmly, her luggage rolling silently beside her. The attendant, a young woman dressed impeccably in Skyline's signature navy suit, glanced up from her computer with a polite smile that seemed practiced yet warm. "Good morning. Welcome to Skyline Private Terminal. Name and flight details, please." "Ava Mitchell. I'm scheduled for a private flight to New York," Ava replied, her voice steady, gentle, but assertive. The attendant quickly verified the details, nodding courteously. "Yes, Ms. Mitchell, your jet is prepared and ready at Gate 9. Please feel free to board at your convenience. The crew will be awaiting your arrival." Ava smiled appreciatively, her anxiety momentarily soothed by the professionalism of the interaction. She proceeded through the elegant corridors of the private terminal, her footsteps confident, echoing softly against the gleaming tiles. Yet as she approached Gate 9, her steps faltered slightly at the sight of the crew member standing near the jet stairs. Something in their stance, their casual demeanor, shifted subtly as she approached. At the forefront stood Captain James Fowler, an experienced pilot known in aviation circles for his impeccable skill. Today, however, his eyes narrowed slightly upon seeing Ava approach, his expression growing wary. "Good morning," Ava greeted, extending a polite nod. "I believe you're expecting me." Captain Fowler exchanged quick, silent glances with Clara, the lead flight attendant, whose crisp uniform seemed slightly more rigid than usual. Clara stepped forward, clipboard in hand, her smile clearly forced. "Good morning, ma'am. May I see your identification and boarding confirmation?" Though slightly surprised by the additional scrutiny, Ava complied without hesitation, pulling up the relevant details on her phone and handing it to Clara. The flight attendant's eyes skimmed over the documents, lingering momentarily in confusion before darting back to the captain uncertainly. Captain Fowler cleared his throat, stepping forward as if he had made a decision. "Ms. Mitchell, are you certain you're at the right place?" His voice was polite enough on the surface, yet it carried an undertone that Ava recognized instantly, an undertone of doubt. Ava's composure tightened slightly, but she kept her tone gentle, dignified. "Absolutely, Captain Fowler. This jet is reserved for my journey to New York." Fowler's eyes narrowed further, and the silence that followed was heavy with his skepticism. "Ms. Mitchell, perhaps there has been some confusion. This is a private flight, booked by our owner, and it is intended strictly for exclusive use. Perhaps your flight is scheduled elsewhere." The unspoken implication hung heavily in the air, stinging Ava deeply despite her outward calm. She had expected scrutiny. Her career had prepared her for that, But outright dismissal was a fresh wound that never truly healed, no matter how often she encountered it. Captain, I'm fully aware of the nature of this flight, Ava reiterated firmly, her voice holding steady despite the hurt rising within her chest. I arranged it myself. Before the captain could respond, Clara interrupted gently, yet her tone subtly patronizing. Miss Mitchell, please understand, we have strict protocols. We cannot permit boarding unless we confirm directly with the jet owner's representative. It's just procedure. Then I suggest you contact that representative immediately, Ava replied, her patience wearing thin beneath her maintained exterior. She felt an uncomfortable heat rise in her cheeks, a flush not of embarrassment, but of quiet indignation. Captain Fowler hesitated visibly, annoyance flickering briefly across his usually composed face. Yet he turned away to make a call, his tone hushed, his body language clearly agitated. Ava stood quietly, feeling an ache that ran deeper than mere irritation. She was painfully aware of the other passengers passing by, their glances lingering with curiosity, their whispers cutting deeper than the captain's doubts. Minutes passed, each moment heavier than the last, until Fowler returned, his expression now uncertain. Miss Mitchell, he began, his voice noticeably subdued. It seems there was indeed a misunderstanding. Your reservation is confirmed. Our sincerest apologies. Ava nodded slightly, her face betraying no outward emotion as she prepared to board. Yet Clara, clearly embarrassed but attempting to salvage dignity, stepped forward again. It's just unusual, ma'am. You must understand that typically we're informed directly if— If what, exactly? Ava interjected gently, yet her voice carried an unmistakable firmness. If a black woman owns a private jet, if someone like me could hold authority over your employment? Clara's cheeks flushed crimson, her eyes widening. No, I didn't mean— But you did mean, Ava replied softly, even if you didn't consciously realize it. The silence was profound. Ava's words hung in the air, palpable, forcing the crew to confront their own assumptions. Captain Fowler looked away, clearly disturbed, perhaps finally seeing the bias that had guided his reaction. Ava understood this moment vividly. She had faced similar moments throughout her life, each instance chipping away slightly at her spirit, yet simultaneously fortifying her resolve. You see, Ava continued, her voice quiet yet strong, each word carefully measured, I didn't rise to where I am by ignoring moments like this. I rose by challenging them, because behind every assumption, every act of quiet humiliation is a person who deserves better. Captain Fowler met her eyes at last, his expression humbled. Ms. Mitchell, I apologize deeply for my misunderstanding. This was not our intention. No, Ava replied gently, her eyes unwavering. But intentions mean little when actions speak volumes. She ascended the steps of the aircraft, her head held high, yet internally wrestling with a storm of emotions, anger, sorrow, disappointment, but also a stubborn hopefulness. She knew that this confrontation had to happen, painful as it was, because it reflected a reality faced by so many others who lacked her position to challenge it. Inside the jet's luxurious cabin, Ava took her seat quietly, her heart pounding from the emotional toll of the encounter. She stared out the window, the morning sunlight suddenly feeling colder. Ava realized in that quiet moment that this battle was not simply hers alone. It was the burden and the privilege of standing for others whose dignity was silently eroded by prejudice every day. As the jet prepared to depart, Ava reflected deeply, knowing that her actions today would echo beyond herself, beyond this single flight, serving as a small but crucial act in a greater struggle. She resolved then, as the engines hummed gently beneath her, to transform this painful humiliation into an enduring call for change, a call that demanded dignity, equality, and genuine respect for every individual who faced such judgments. The jet lifted gracefully into the sky, leaving behind more than just a runway. It left a powerful lesson etched in Ava's soul, one she would never forget, and one she would carry forward, stronger than ever. The atmosphere inside the sleek, lavish interior of Ava Mitchell's private jet was tense. The elegance of plush leather seats and polished wood accents seemingly at odds with the palpable strain filling the cabin. Ava sat quietly, poised but distant, her gaze fixed thoughtfully out the oval window, observing clouds drifting peacefully beneath the aircraft's wings. Yet within her mind, tranquility was elusive, replaced instead by a swirling mix of frustration, sadness, and steely resolve. At the front of the aircraft, separated by only a thin curtain, Captain James Fowler stood rigidly, his usually confident stance now shaken, visibly burdened by the magnitude of his earlier error. The flight attendants, including Clara, were notably subdued, silently exchanging nervous glances as they went about their duties. The silence was not merely awkward, it was suffocating. After a long pause, Ava finally drew in a calming breath, straightening slightly in her seat. Her thoughts were clear now, sharpened by the bitter sting of the experience she had just endured. What troubled her most was not the mere existence of prejudice, an adversary she knew well, but rather the realization that such biases were so casually embedded even within her own organization. She reached calmly for her phone, fingertips hovering over its screen as she considered her next action carefully. With a decisive tap, she dialed a number she rarely called directly, a number reserved for matters of true significance. "Hello, Ms. Mitchell," answered a respectful voice, slightly surprised at hearing from her directly. "Alex, we have an urgent matter to address immediately upon landing. Please gather the management team at our headquarters in New York. This needs to be handled transparently and without delay." "Of course," came the swift reply. Ava could sense Alex's curiosity, but knew her trusted assistant well enough to expect discretion. Hanging up gently, Ava leaned back into the seat, closing her eyes momentarily to gather her thoughts. This was more than a personal affront. It represented a failure of leadership, an oversight within the very culture she had painstakingly nurtured. A profound sense of responsibility surged within her, responsibility to confront this truth head-on, no matter how uncomfortable it might become. The aircraft began its descent shortly thereafter, New York's sprawling skyline emerging beneath them, a breathtaking tapestry of glass and steel glittering under the mid-afternoon sun. But Ava's thoughts lingered far from beauty, her mind now firmly set on the task awaiting her on the ground. Upon touchdown, the crew remained awkwardly silent, their usual cheerful announcements replaced by curt professionalism. Ava gathered her belongings with measured grace, aware of their watchful eyes following her every movement. She felt a fleeting temptation to speak, to break the silence with reassurance, but resisted. This was not a moment for comfort. It was a lesson long overdue. A sleek black SUV awaited her at the private terminal, its tinted windows shielding her from the outside gaze. As the vehicle smoothly navigated the busy streets toward Harper Global's New York headquarters, Ava's reflection caught her eye in the glass. She saw determination mixed with a quiet sadness, a combination she had carried too often throughout her life. Minutes later, Harper Global's corporate headquarters rose imposingly before her, a gleaming monument to ambition, perseverance, and achievement. But today, its shimmering facade felt somehow hollow, less a symbol of triumph and more a mirror reflecting deeper flaws. Ava knew it was her duty to address these flaws openly, no matter how painful. Inside the large boardroom, an air of nervous tension awaited her arrival. Executives shifted restlessly in their seats, conversations hushed as Ava entered the room. Standing at the head of the long conference table, she regarded the assembled team. faces she had trusted, many of whom she herself had mentored. The weight of her gaze quieted any lingering whispers, focusing every eye upon her. "Thank you all for gathering so quickly," she began calmly, her voice gentle yet commanding attention effortlessly. "Today, an incident occurred that demands our immediate reflection." She paused briefly, allowing her words to resonate. "I was met with doubt and disrespect by our own crew, merely because my appearance did not match their expectations of authority or ownership. It was more than disappointing. It was profoundly revealing." Gasps murmured softly through the room, expressions shifting from confusion to shock. Ava continued, her tone steady yet tinged subtly with sorrow. "This isn't just about me. It's about the hidden biases we've allowed to exist unnoticed, unchallenged, and uncorrected within our organization. Such incidents don't occur in isolation. They reflect deeper systemic flaws, and it is our duty to address them now." Alex cleared his throat quietly from the far end of the table. "Ms. Mitchell, I apologize deeply on behalf of—" Ava gently raised her hand, stopping him. "Thank you, Alex. But this isn't simply about apologies. It's about acknowledging the truth we often avoid. My question is, how did we miss this? How did our values fail to permeate the culture we claim to uphold?" The silence that followed her words was deafening. Executives exchanged uncomfortable glances, grappling internally with Ava's pointed question. After what felt like an eternity, Maria Peterson, Harper Global's head of human resources, broke the tension hesitantly. "Ms. Mitchell, perhaps we've been too complacent, assuming our policies alone could prevent bias. Clearly, we underestimated the reality on the ground." Ava nodded thoughtfully. "You're right, Maria. Policies alone aren't enough. True change requires genuine cultural shifts, not surface-level diversity statements or mandatory training alone. We need meaningful introspection, ongoing dialogue, and accountability at every level." Heads around the table nodded slowly, the atmosphere shifting from defensiveness toward acknowledgement. Ava continued, her voice softening slightly, yet retaining its strength. "As leaders, our responsibility goes beyond the profit margins and quarterly goals. It extends into fostering a space where every person, regardless of background or appearance, feels genuinely respected and empowered. Today's incident proved we have work to do." Slowly, Captain Fowler and Clara were escorted into the boardroom, their expressions pale, humbled by the gravity of this gathering. Ava turned to them calmly. "Captain Fowler, Clara, you're here not simply to face disciplinary actions, but to help us understand why this happened. What led you to doubt me? To question my presence on a jet owned by the woman standing before you?" Fowler's voice trembled slightly as he spoke, eyes cast downward. "Ms. Mitchell, I regret deeply how I handled this situation. I realize now my assumptions were deeply flawed. They were rooted in biases I wasn't even conscious of." Clara nodded tearfully. "It was an error of judgment that exposed my own unconscious prejudices. I am deeply sorry." Ava regarded them compassionately, aware their remorse was genuine. "This is a difficult but crucial revelation. The prejudices that surface today aren't unique to you. They're a reflection of a broader, more pervasive issue. The difference is, today, you both became aware. Awareness is the first step towards genuine change." She turned again to the executives. "Effective immediately, we will implement comprehensive unconscious bias training, open forums for honest discussion, and measurable accountability at every managerial level. We must rebuild trust from within, starting today." As Ava concluded, her presence radiated a quiet power, balancing accountability with a deep empathy. The meeting ended with a newfound resolve among attendees, a collective understanding that this painful moment could become a transformative one. That evening, as Ava returned to her Manhattan apartment overlooking the glittering cityscape below, she felt an emotional heaviness mixed with profound hope. Though the day's events had been draining, they illuminated a necessary path forward, a path paved by humility, transparency, and a sincere commitment to equality. She reflected quietly, understanding that real change never came easily, nor without discomfort. But she knew now, more clearly than ever, that true strength lay not merely in confronting prejudice when it appeared, but in actively dismantling the biases that allowed it to thrive unseen. Looking out over the endless expanse of lights and dreams spread before her, Ava felt a deep sense of responsibility, but also immense gratitude. She had faced humiliation, yet, through it had revealed an essential truth not only to herself but to those around her. And it was this truth, however difficult, that would guide her steps forward. The golden hues of dawn stretched across New York City's skyline, casting gentle warmth over Harper Global's impressive corporate headquarters. Inside her spacious office overlooking the city's bustling avenues, Ava Mitchell stood quietly by the floor-to-ceiling windows. She watched the city awaken, feeling both humbled and invigorated. The last several weeks had been transformative, not merely for herself, but for every member of the organization she led. It had begun with a painful confrontation, an experience that had tested Ava's patience and challenged her deeply held beliefs about fairness and dignity. Yet that very discomfort had sparked something powerful, a profound shift in the cultural core of Harper Global. Rather than hide behind defensive rhetoric or temporary measures, Ava had chosen transparency, vulnerability, and a steadfast commitment to meaningful change. Now, as she observed the morning traffic below, she knew the journey toward genuine equity had only just begun. Her assistant, Alex, knocked gently on the doorframe, breaking Ava's contemplative silence. He entered with a respectful nod, carrying an organized stack of folders and a sleek tablet displaying updates from the recent diversity and inclusion initiatives. "Good morning, Ava," Alex greeted softly. "The feedback from yesterday's forum is in. The response has been overwhelmingly positive. Employees feel heard, truly heard, for the first time." Ava turned toward him, a gentle smile illuminating her face. "That's wonderful news, Alex, but this is just the beginning. We can't let momentum fade." Alex nodded, understanding clearly the depth of her commitment. "Absolutely. The team has drafted the next phase. We're planning regular town halls, mentorship programs, and ongoing unconscious bias workshops. But more importantly, employees are volunteering, eager to lead discussions themselves." This detail resonated deeply with Ava. Genuine change, she knew, could never be imposed from the top alone. It had to blossom organically from within. Employees actively choosing to drive these conversations meant the roots of cultural transformation were taking hold. "That's precisely the spirit we need," Ava replied thoughtfully. "Leadership's role isn't just to dictate, it's to empower. Our people need space to speak openly, honestly, and without fear." After Alex left the office, Ava walked toward her desk where her journal sat open from the night before, filled with reflections and notes. Journaling had long been a practice she cherished, offering clarity amid uncertainty. Last night, she had written about the initial pain of confronting prejudice within her own ranks, but more importantly, about the immense responsibility and opportunity that emerged from that pain. As Ava prepared for the day's keynote presentation, part of Harper Global's inaugural Equity Summit, her mind drifted to the broader impact beyond the company's walls. The public had taken notice of the organization's transparent approach to addressing internal bias. Media coverage had evolved from curiosity and scrutiny into genuine admiration. Industry peers reached out, intrigued, seeking insights on how they might replicate such authenticity in their own organizations. Harper Global was quickly becoming a beacon, illuminating a path toward true corporate accountability. Later that morning, Ava stood before a diverse assembly gathered inside Harper Global's spacious conference hall. The audience was a vibrant tapestry, young interns eager to make a mark, seasoned executives reflecting on entrenched practices, and community advocates hopeful that corporate America could indeed shift toward meaningful equity. Good morning, Ava began, her voice steady yet deeply sincere. We gather today because we share a belief, one that unites us across differences in age, race, gender, and background. It is the belief that dignity and respect are not privileges, but fundamental rights afforded to every individual, no matter who they are or where they come from. She paused momentarily, scanning the audience, allowing her words to settle with gravity. Yet too often, organizations, including our own, have fallen short of this belief. We have allowed unconscious biases to dictate who belongs, who advances, and who is heard. But acknowledgement alone isn't enough. We must act. We must commit not just in words, but in deeds. The audience listened intently, absorbing each syllable with the gravity it deserved. Ava's transparency was disarming yet empowering, her authenticity bridging the gap between the corporate stage and the realities of everyday employees. This journey of change, Ava continued firmly, began with personal discomfort, a moment when my own identity was challenged by individuals within our company who could not reconcile the idea that someone who looked like me could possibly lead. But from that uncomfortable truth, something remarkable began to grow. Genuine, courageous conversations that forced us to look deeply within. The hall was utterly still, captured by her honesty. We learn that real transformation requires humility. It requires leaders, myself included, to step back, listen, and allow those who've long been silenced to speak clearly, loudly, and unapologetically. Ava highlighted recent steps Harper Global had undertaken: employee-led workshops, internal equity audits, revised hiring practices, and mentorship initiatives connecting senior leadership with underrepresented staff members. But more importantly, she emphasized passionately, our greatest achievement isn't merely a checklist of initiatives. It's the cultural shift taking root, the recognition among every team member that their voice matters, their dignity is non-negotiable, and their potential is limitless. The audience erupted in spontaneous applause, appreciation radiating through the room. It was more than polite recognition. It was genuine emotion stirred by sincerity and courage. During a break in this day's events, Ava mingled among attendees, listening actively as employees and guests approached, sharing personal stories and reflections. She paused to talk with an intern named Grace, who spoke with gentle earnestness. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for making space for us to speak openly. Until now, I've often felt invisible, just another face in the crowd. But your willingness to share your experience and hold everyone accountable, including yourself, made me feel valued, genuinely seen. Ava placed a comforting hand on Grace's shoulder, her own heart swelling with profound gratitude. Grace, your voice matters deeply. Your story, your truth, is what inspires lasting change. Thank you for having the courage to share it. As the summit concluded, Ava felt a quiet but unmistakable pride. The journey ahead would not be easy. Real progress seldom was. Yet what filled her heart was knowing they were no longer walking that path alone. There was a shared commitment across ranks and roles to dismantle barriers, acknowledge blind spots, and build something genuine, fair, and sustainable. Back in her office, Ava sat quietly, reflecting on the day's impact. Her thoughts returned to that difficult day aboard her private jet, once a painful memory, now reframed as a turning point that ignited powerful momentum. She understood clearly now that strength was not merely the ability to withstand prejudice, but the courage to confront and dismantle it entirely. That evening, Ava received an unexpected message, a handwritten note from Captain James Fowler. In concise yet heartfelt words, he expressed sincere gratitude for being given the chance to grow, learn, and rectify the biases he'd unconsciously carried for so long. I realize, Fowler wrote earnestly, that your actions not only changed our company, they changed me. You've shown me what real leadership looks like: humble, reflective, courageous. I promise to honor this lesson in every action I take forward. Ava folded the letter carefully, deeply moved. It was proof that inspiring change wasn't just about corporate policy or public perception. It was deeply personal, profoundly human. As night descended over the city, casting Harper Global's headquarters in gentle shadows, Ava returned to her journal. She wrote thoughtfully, with renewed clarity. Today reaffirms something essential. Change is possible, but it requires courage, vulnerability, and persistent effort. It requires all of us, not merely to challenge others, but ourselves as well. Real transformation isn't linear. It's messy, uncomfortable, and demanding, but it's also profoundly beautiful. Because within that discomfort lies the power to truly see each other, to acknowledge and respect our shared humanity. Closing her journal softly, Ava looked out once more upon the city lights below, a mosaic of dreams, challenges, and possibilities. She felt profound gratitude for every lesson learned, every story shared, and every voice that had risen in courage. The path forward remained challenging, but tonight, Ava Mitchell knew with absolute certainty they were heading in the right direction, guided not by fear, but by the inspiring power of truth. Throughout the three parts of this story, we witnessed a journey not just of a woman facing humiliation and prejudice, but of turning pain into purpose, and from that purpose, sparking meaningful, lasting change. Ava Mitchell began that morning like any successful leader, confident, composed, preparing to board a jet she herself owned. But what she didn't know was that this morning would become a turning point, not just in her life, but in the culture of her organization, and perhaps in the mindset of an entire industry. From a moment of being doubted because of her gender, her skin color, and unconscious bias, Ava chose not to react with anger, not to walk away, not to let emotion cloud her wisdom. She stood her ground and used the painful experience as a catalyst for a much larger conversation about fairness, compassion, and the responsibility of leadership. One of the most eye-opening takeaways is this: no matter how successful you are, how far you've come, people may still doubt you, judge you unfairly because of the invisible stereotypes they carry. Ava was the CEO of a global company, a symbol of achievement, and yet she was immediately questioned by the very crew hired to serve her flight. In their minds, the owner of the jet didn't look like Ava. This is living proof that bias doesn't always speak out loud, but it quietly influences behavior, often without the person realizing it. The easiest thing to do would have been to handle the incident privately, quietly, and move on. But Ava chose a harder path: public dialogue, honest confrontation, and transparency with her leadership team. She didn't try to protect the brand. She stood up and asked the real question: how did this happen under our roof? That's courageous, authentic leadership, the kind the world desperately needs today. Not leaders who are always right, but those who are willing to admit mistakes, learn, and bring others along in the process of change. From Grace, the intern who once felt invisible, to senior leaders who began to change their perspective, Ava's presence became a mirror reflecting everyone's deeper values. Someone brave enough to speak the truth, to feel the pain, to stand tall under judgment. That's the kind of person who stirs collective conscience. Courage is contagious, and belief spreads. That's how true change begins. One of the most powerful moments was when Ava told Captain Fowler and Clara, "The difference isn't in your mistake. It's in the fact that today, you became aware of it." We all carry unconscious biases. No one is immune. But the question is, do we have the courage to confront them and change? Fowler's handwritten letter at the end wasn't just an apology. It was the symbol of a man transformed. Someone who once doubted Ava, but now had learned the greatest lesson of his life. Harper Global didn't transform its culture through buzzwords or polished brochures. They began with awkward silences, difficult admissions, and deep listening. From real conversations, volunteer-led workshops, open forums, and mentorship programs, a new cultural current began to flow. It was no longer about company policy, but about personal commitment. Ava planted the seed, but it was the collective involvement of everyone that made it grow into a more fair, safe, and trustworthy ecosystem. Had Ava stayed silent that day, she wouldn't have caused a stir. No one would have felt uncomfortable, but no one would have changed either. Silence is sometimes a form of complicity. Ava's choice to speak up, even though it was painful, brought light to so many others in the dark. Her story reminds us real transformation doesn't begin when we're comfortable. It begins when we lean into discomfort and refuse to look away. Because maybe you've been doubted, undervalued, overlooked. Maybe you felt invisible, unheard, or misjudged. Or maybe you've been the one holding unconscious bias without knowing it. Maybe you've made unfair assumptions or stayed silent when you should have spoken up. Wherever you are on that spectrum, you can change. And you can be the one to inspire change around you. Ava Mitchell's story isn't just a story. It's a wake-up call, a reminder, an invitation. We need more voices like Ava's. We need more organizations willing to look in the mirror and own their blind spots. And above all, we need you, reading these final lines, to become part of this movement for change. Hit like and subscribe if you believe in this kind of content. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because every new subscriber isn't just a number. It's motivation for us to keep telling powerful, honest, and deeply human stories like this one. Thank you for being here. And we'll see you in the next video, where we'll continue to share stories of courage, compassion, and the unstoppable power of human change.